and welcome to today's live IELTS class. My name is Adrian, and I'm streaming to you from Budapest. I hope everybody is having a good weekend so far, staying healthy, strong, and learning lots. Hi, Nazir. Hi, Sammy. Hi, Janil, sorry. Hi, Bisser. Hi, Anna, Ayana. Hi, Hina. Hi, Begjan. Lots of members in the class. That's fantastic. Students, in this class, we are doing questions and answers for the IELTS exam. Our goal is to understand it all, inside and out. So here's your chance to ask me some questions. I will do my best to give you the answers. If I can't, you can always follow up with me by email, and I'll get back to you on it for sure. While we wait for a few more people to join up, this lesson is brought to you by aehelp.com. That's academicenglishhelp.com, as well as gieltshelp.com. That's generalieltshelp.com. On both of our websites, we have lots and lots of materials for you. aehelp.com is for academic. You can link the app, Academic IELTS Help. gieltshelp.com is for general. You can link the app, General IELTS Help. Hi, Rajveer, Abhishek, Lipouge, more people joining in. That's fantastic. This is the academic version of our website here. Click that big red button to join. You'll see lots of HD videos with me, as well as some other teachers. And the general one is the green background. Click that big red button to join. Members, while I'm giving my preamble here, please start thinking about your questions that you want to ask me for today. And again, for all of our viewers, to contact me by email, just send the email to adrian@aehelp.com. Again, today we have questions and answers, and then in 90 minutes we will have an all-chat class where everybody can join in on the chat. That will be a speaking part 3 focus. If anybody wants to get into this class, they need to be a member of the channel, so you need to click the join button beside the subscribe button. All right, so let's get into it. I will get to as many of your questions today as I can in the order that I see them, and of course making some logical connections. So I see that there are already lots of questions coming from our members. All right, let me see. Okay. There we go. All right, so let's get into it. Jainil Gabani is asking in the listening and reading section how to write email. One word, like email, like that, or email. Okay. Great. Yeah, Jainil, it's confusing, right? That happens sometimes, students, when there are emerging new words in the world. Sometimes it's a bit confusing for everybody what the correct way to write the word is. And of course, email has largely replaced the traditional mail. So, Jainil, the two correct ways to write it are email and also as email. Okay. Notice how even my spell check, you don't see any red line. It's not highlighting either of these. Both of these are acceptable ways to write the word email. All right. E, of course, means electronic. So this is a shortening of the two words electronic mail. That's the full, those are the full two words. But it's such a common word nowadays that we simplify it to email or email. Personally, I just use this one because it's one character less, so it's without the hyphen, and it's simpler. And in the future, it's very likely that we will only see this form eventually. So all these other forms will disappear. Now, Jainil, of course, if it starts the sentence, like you write a sentence like email is a part of most people's daily lives, then in this case, of course, Jainil, you have to capitalize it because it is, in this case, the first word in the sentence, okay? So in that case, yes. But otherwise, it's a common noun and I would use this version. Okay, I believe you're asking me that for general IELTS Task 1 writing when you're asked to respond to an email or send an email. Okay, so it's a good question. All right, Hina is asking, do we really need to use fancy vocabulary to get a high score in writing? The answer is no. That's a really, really good question, Hina. Okay, so Hina is asking, Hina, I'm going to state it a little bit differently. Do candidates need to use advanced vocabulary in the writing section to get high scores? Now, when we're talking about high scores, let's quantify that. So let's say bands 7 to 9. Okay, that's the very accurate way to ask that question, Hina. The simple answer is no. Okay, simply no. It is much more important to use vocabulary accurately. Okay. The reason I say that, Hina, is because oftentimes I see students trying to use fancy vocabulary and they're using it in awkward ways that makes their writing confusing. They're using incorrect word forms. And in my mind, as the examiner, I'm thinking, why didn't this student just choose a simpler word, express themselves clearly, and I can give them a higher band? So this is a way to think about it. Okay, if you use high level vocabulary incorrectly, you will drop to 6 band 6 or lower, especially if your writing becomes incoherent because of it. Okay. However, if you use common vocabulary well, without mistakes, and you have good structure and content, you can easily get a band 7.5, even 8, or 8.5 even. Okay, so I highly recommend students to focus on using vocabulary that they're very familiar with and using it accurately, than experimenting with high-level vocabulary and risking the chance that you're going to make some big mistakes and really drop your score. Okay, so Hina, that's a really good question, and again, the simple answer is no. Okay. All right, Sammy says, in the speaking interview, can we ask the interviewer to call us with a different name other than the original name after introducing myself? Yeah, you can. I mean, I guess you mean like in the beginning, right, Sammy? So if you, I don't know, if you say, my name is Rajveer Singh, but my nickname is Frank, please call me Frank. Yeah, you can do that. So you can ask the examiner. So the answer here is yes. Yes, you can ask the examiner to call you by a nickname that you are used to. Yeah, absolutely. They don't have to call you by the name on your passport or your full given name, sure. And if you prefer to be called by your nickname, then say that, because that will actually help you to stay focused, okay? If the examiner keeps calling you by a name that you're not really used to, you don't use so often, that could be awkward, and that could actually lead to lower band scores. So, and here's an interesting point as well to that. Okay, so so Sammy, it was a good question. So it's important because in part 2 and part 3, and even in part 1, they might actually use your name when they're referring to you. Like, okay, Sammy, now in part 2, here's a card, right? So it's important that you feel as comfortable and confident as possible during your speaking interview. So, absolutely, be called by the name you feel most comfortable with. Okay, it's very important. And even more so because these days, in most places, and I think maybe all places, I'm a little bit careful to say all places, but in most places for sure, you have to wear a mask during your speaking interview. Okay, this makes it a bit more difficult, and we've had students on our YouTube channel talk and complain about this, that during their speaking interview they had to wear a mask and they weren't ready for that. So here's an interesting tip, and it's connected with your question, Sammy, because it's regarding being comfortable and confident, okay? And of course, speaking another language without a mask is already intimidating enough. It's scary enough. So having to speak in another language with a mask in an interview, yeah, it's not the best, right? So this makes it a bit more difficult to communicate. Plus, there's a lot of communication that happens with our face when we're speaking, right? So this makes it a bit more difficult to communicate for sure. You have to, number one, speak a bit louder and clearer than usual. 2, practice, I know it sounds funny, but practice speaking English with a mask on. Do a few speaking interviews with a mask on before your exam. Okay, so again, it's not a good situation to be in your speaking interview and the first time that you're speaking in English with a mask on is the official exam. Ugh, really? No, put it on and see what happens when you speak English with a mask on, okay? Do that at home a couple of times. Does that make sense, students? That's quite an important one, so I'd like to see a thumbs up with that. It's quite an important suggestion. So practice the speaking interview a couple of times at home with a mask on, especially if you have a speaking interview coming up in the next week or two, because it's very likely that you're going to be in that situation. Okay? Have any of you practiced speaking interviews with the mask on? I'm just curious. Has anybody done this? Abhishek, have you done this where you're wearing a mask? Okay. And you're speaking English? Yeah, okay, everybody's got it. Okay, Bisser says, yeah, I did it. Abhishek says, not yet. Okay, yeah, so before your speaking interview, definitely put it on because it's a different experience, right? It's a different experience. All right, so practice it before your speaking interview. Good. So that was good. Good question, Sammy. That definitely prompted me to remember that important point that I wanted to make. And I'm glad that all of you got that. That's great. All right. Let's keep going along. Good question, students. See, good information comes up when you open up for some Q&A dialogue. Okay, Charlie Sen says, when do I use had been or has been? Okay, Charlie. A couple of different situations for that. I'll give you an answer. So Charlie's asking, a little bit of grammar here. When do I use has been or had been? Okay. Answer 2 times, so in 2 places. You need 3, 3 actually, Charlie, but the third one's a little bit interesting here. So you need to use this grammar in 3 different situations. Okay. One is, let me just do a little bit of format clearing here to make this a little bit better. All right. So let's go here. So number 1, in passive, present, or past perfect. Okay. So for example, I have been driven to school by my mom since grade 1. Okay, so here, Charlie, I'm using the have plus the been because it's with the passive. So I'm not driving, my mother is doing the driving. So in this case, I need been, okay, and my mom is still doing it. Okay, now it's the same thing for had been, but that would be, of course, past perfect. So I had been driven to school by my mom until last year, at which time I got my driver's license. Okay, so in both of these cases, I'm using the have been, had been to write the correct passive form, okay? Because my mom is what's called the agent of the action, and I'm the subject, and the action is done to me by another agent, in this case, my mom, okay? So that's one situation where you use it. Another situation where you use this type of grammar is with the progressive form, okay? So in the progressive form, I have been driving to school for the last 5 years since I got my license, okay? So in this case, notice how there's no mom. So this is active. Okay, it's different than this one. Now, the way we recognize the difference between the passive and the progressive is with the verb, the action verb. So here the action verb is in the past participle, Charlie. See how it's en? And here the action verb is in the ing. It's in the progressive form. And of course, both of them require the auxiliary verbs being, okay? In this case to show passive, in this case to show progressive. Now in this case, I'm creating a motion or a visual picture that's continuous for my audience, which shows that this is going on for 5 years since I got my license, okay? Now it's the same for the past, right? So I had line. Okay, so I had been driving to school for 5 years prior to losing my license for speeding. Okay. So here, same thing, continuous in the past. So of course, present perfect, it's still going on. Past perfect, it's no longer happening for some reason, and it's an action that happens before another action. So here, I had been driving continuously to school for 5 years before I lost my license because of speeding, so getting caught for speeding, right? Okay. So that's another one. Now, let's keep going with this. So the one case where sometimes students get really confused with this have been and had been is when you're simply using the past participle been as the verb itself, okay? So watch this, Charlie, and I think, Charlie, I know your English is quite good, and this is probably where you're getting confused, and perhaps this hasn't been explained clearly yet, but sometimes the actual verb itself is been. So I have been an engineering student for the past 5 years. So here, the sentence is not progressive, it's not passive, it's actually a simple present perfect, but here the past participle itself is been. Okay, so notice how there's only 2 verbs here. Here there's 3. So have and been are the auxiliary verbs, and driving is the action verb. Okay, now here have and been, have is the auxiliary verb, and been is the action verb. It's the state of being. Okay, so I have been an engineering student for the past 5 years. And then here, again, we could say I had been an engineering student for the past 5 years. Then I decided to switch to biology. Okay, so again, an event in the past before another event in the past. So here, this is a simple past perfect where being is the action verb, okay? Now, it can get even more complicated, and I'll just throw this out for fun for you. Some of you might be thinking, well, Adrian, what happens if the sentence is a passive, progressive, present, or past perfect? Anybody know? Let's see if anybody can tell me this. So, Maynamar, welcome to our group of members. Make sure to send me an email so I can hook you up with the perks. Anybody know how to make this kind of sentence? It exists in English. We rarely use it, especially in speaking. In writing, we see it more often, but in speaking, it's quite rare. Even native speakers find this a little bit awkward, but it does exist, okay? And you will eventually come across this kind of grammar, which is a passive, progressive, present perfect. Anybody know how to write that kind of a sentence? Begjan says, my phone has just been lost. No. That would not be. So has just been lost, Begjan, is just a passive. It's not progressive. Okay? So this exists, Jainil, this exists, but it's quite a tricky grammar. It's one of the most advanced forms of English grammar that you'll come across. Okay? So you do have this grammar where passive meets progressive. So in this case, you need both beans. I'll show you. I'll give you an example. I have been being driven by my mother to school for the past 5 years. Okay? So that's what that looks like. Again, please don't play with this in the IELTS. I'm just showing you this kind of for fun to show you how advanced grammar can get. But here, what happens is you have auxiliary verb have, you have the auxiliary verb being, and another auxiliary verb being that shows the actual progressive form, and then the past participle driven. So this would be a passive, progressive, present perfect because I have. If it's had, that would be the difference for the past perfect, okay? So I have been being driven by my mother to school for the past 5 years. So that is correct English grammar, okay? And of course, students, do remember that when we have the double auxiliary verb, especially in speaking, we contract the have, okay? So we'd say, I've been being driven by my mother. Okay, So, because it just sounds really awkward to pronounce all of those auxiliary verbs, all right? Yeah, Maksud, very good. The package have been being delivered late. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that would be a good example, Maksud. Great job, Maksud. I knew one of you would get it. Very good, Maksud. All right, so good. So just for fun, now you know how wacky English can get. Okay, all right, let's see some more questions that are more on topic here. But that was good. By the way, students, so again, don't really, don't use passive progressive. It's not necessary. It might even weird out the examiner. But definitely you should use these other ones that we talked about here. So Charlie, that was a good question. You should have at least one or two appearances of the progressive present past perfect and passive form of the past perfect as well. Okay. All right. Let's see what else you come up with. Okay, let's see what else you have. So, lots of questions. Let's see who was in the right order here. Okay, there's email. Okay, Charlie, right? Regveer's next. There we go. All right, so Regveer says, at times I find it challenging to use the correct articles. How can I improve that? Yeah, okay, good question, Regveer. So Regveer is asking, how can I improve using the correct articles? Okay, now articles, students, I know not everybody's familiar with these technical words in the linguistics. Articles, they basically mean using an, and the. Okay? So, the rule in good communication, Rajveer, is to not overuse articles. Okay? So, the rule in professional writing especially is to avoid use of articles whenever possible. All right? So that means you should always review. So always review your writing and see if you can remove unnecessary articles. Okay, so that's a good trick. Now Roger is probably going, yeah, but my question exactly, Adrian, is when do I do that? How do I do that? Okay, so read it with and without. So read it with and without the article. See if it makes sense. Okay, now, of course, Rajveer, as you know, use the when you are discussing a special circumstance or item. Okay. Use for non-vowel nouns and use an for vowel nouns, like an apple. Now, think about this, Rajveer. Okay, so think that when you use a or un, you are actually emphasizing one. Okay. Think in this context, do I need to emphasize the one. If not, you may not need the or un. Okay, so the or the un, they're not, so they're articles, but in fact they do have that meaning of the singular, right, of the one, and they emphasize that it's one apple. I ate an apple. Okay, I ate an apple means I ate one apple. In this case, I want to emphasize it because it's a contrast to apples. Okay, but when we don't need to count it. Like, I'll give you an example here, Rajveer. People fear dying. Okay, fear is the verb here. Dying is the noun here. So people fear dying. I don't need the article sorry. Let me correct that for you. People fear death. Okay, so death is the noun. People fear death. And we don't need to say people fear the death because it's not special. It's just any death, right? I don't fear one special kind of death. I fear all kinds of death. I fear dying from sickness. I fear dying from an accident. So it's not a special kind of death. And it's not one death that I fear, but it's death in general that I fear. So I don't need the or the un to signify that it's one in this case. So I simply just fear death. Okay, so kind of think about it that way, and don't overthink it. So don't get, unless you're a very, very high level student and you're looking for that band 9, ironically, you don't actually need to worry too much about the articles. You're not going to lose a lot of band scores for articles if your writing is clear. Making mistakes in articles, that's done even by very high-level students or even by native speakers, high-level writers in university. So article mistakes are very common mistakes for anybody at any level of English, and you don't need to stress about it too much. Okay, so that's it for articles. It's good to know them, and it's good to mostly use them correctly. Yeah, Rajveer, the is mostly overused. Yeah, people use the way too often, and it's a bit awkward when you see a lot of the, like the, yeah. Okay. Yeah, Rajveer, if it's a general statement, you don't need to worry about it so much. Okay, let's see. What else do we have? Coming after Rajveer's question, I'm going to pick it up from there. All right, Samuel says... Samuel Sadir says, 4, is this positive or negative question? Should we answer both sides, or can we focus the body paragraphs on one side? I think maybe I'm missing part of your question, Samuel, before Rajveer somewhere. I don't see it. Rajveer, or sorry, Samuel, I don't see your full question, or it's not making sense to me. Oh, I see, Samuel. Okay, I got it, Samuel. So 4, is this positive or negative question? Should we answer both sides, or can we focus the body on one side? Samuel, if the question for task 2, I get what you're asking me now. Okay, so if the question is this a positive or negative? Then in this case, most of the time, so the answer here is most of the time, you only need to choose one side and give 2 good reasons for why it is either positive or negative, but not both. Now you have to pay attention, Samuel, to the question, because if it's both positive and negative, which can happen, then you might say, well, it's clearly both positive and negative. But in most cases, it's going to be one or the other. Okay, so don't discuss both sides. So for most of these, it's going to be one side. where you have to discuss both sides, it will say discuss the negatives and positives and give your own opinion. Then you discuss both sides. But when it's positive or negative, and most of the time, 9 out of 10 times, one of these is clearly dominant and they want you to focus on that one side, okay? You might introduce a slight concept of the opposite side in the introduction just to give a bit of contrast, but in your body paragraphs is what you're asking, Samuel. Most of the time, definitely you're focusing on just one, okay? Not both. So I know that a lot of students, when they see these advantages, disadvantages, positive, negative, they will write one paragraph on each, and that's a mistake. In many cases, you don't have to do that, and you shouldn't do that because it's awkward, okay? And it makes the essay unclear. So good question, Samuel, but one side. Bisser says, my question is, which one's better to say? Is it Sir Adrian or Mr. Adrian? Bisser, honestly, I'm Canadian, and in Canada, we don't really use Sir or Mr. We'll even rarely use doctor. So for Canadians like myself, the most natural is just to hear our first name, Adrian. Okay, even many doctors don't like being called Dr. something. They just like being called John or Tim. We like to kind of feel this equality amongst each other, and it makes us feel a little bit awkward to be called Sir or Mr. So it's a good question, Bisser. It depends on the culture. It is polite to say Mr. Adrian, I guess, but you can just call me Adrian. Okay, thanks for asking that. All right, Maksud says, Adrian, I'm stuck at band 6. What should I do? Figure out why you're stuck at band 6, Maksud. So for students who are stuck at a certain band, especially if it's just slightly below what you need, okay, it's a good question, Maksud. So Maksud's saying, I'm stuck at band 6. What do I need to do? Okay. The simple, quick answer is figure out what you are doing wrong. Is it grammar? Is it word choice? Is it content? Is it all three? You need to figure that out. And in order to figure that out, you need to get the proper professional kind of feedback. So Maksud, exactly for people like in your situation, that's where we really strongly suggest paying a few dollars and sending us your writing task for editing, or booking a speaking interview session with us so that we can analyze what you're doing and we can direct you in the correct path, or on the correct path, so that you can make that improvement, okay? So figure out what you're doing. If you have been stuck on this band for a while, it is time to spend a bit of money on getting some real professional. And, I don't want to sound like we're pushing our own services here. So if you do that with somebody else, that's fine. Just get it done, okay? Don't try to figure it out on your own. Get professional help. Get help from people that have proven to know what they're saying, okay? So spend a bit of money on getting some real professional feedback on your writing and speaking. I don't want to say mistakes, shortcomings, okay? Mistakes, it's not really necessarily a mistake. It just might be a shortcoming, something that you're not realizing in your speech, okay? I had a very high-level student the other day for an interview, and all he needs to do is just fix using the word you in his speaking to improve a full band score. Okay, I mean, he's just really using that word too often. So sometimes it's something fairly simple, Maksud, but definitely get feedback. And then, of course, target and focus improving what you discover. Okay. All right. Hassan says, how can we change accurately our writing structure from topic sentence, general information, explanation, extra details, examples, very specific details? Hassan, are you asking me like how to transition? So therefore, in more detail or quantifying this phenomenon. So is this what you're asking me? Like these kinds of leading expressions to transition from the topic sentence to the explanation to the specific detail? Or are you asking me conceptually with the actual content itself? So can you answer that for me? So are you thinking like technically with vocabulary and with leading expressions, or are you asking me conceptually, like in your thinking, how to transition from one to the other? What's the exact question here? If you're still with us, hopefully you are. Okay, so Hassan says yes, because many times I fail to do that, even though I know that, but sometimes I still make this mistake. Again, Hassan, do you mean like conceptually, like you're following your topic sentence with another topic sentence, or do you mean like your topic sentence and your explanation seem disconnected? So those are different questions, right? So if you're talking technically, so you should learn several different leading expressions which connect the elements of your body paragraphs. Okay, so if you make a topic statement like in this past week, the essay that we were dealing with was colors, right? So, it has been proven by psychologists that employees in spaces dominated by gray and dark color schemes underperform. So this would be my topic sentence. So it has been, instead of had been, it has been proven by psychologists that employees in spaces dominated by gray and dark color schemes underperform and under-deliver. Yeah, so if I'm going into an explanation here, Hassan, then it's good to use a connective. Now, the question that you want to ask yourself conceptually is, what do I mean by this? So what do I mean gray color schemes underperform? Now here, the point of my statement is the underperformance and the under-delivery. So for your reader, have that dialogue. So conceptually, Hassan, conceptually, it's that dialogue. Remember that dialogue that I've mentioned a few times where you have to take the position of your reader. So here, my reader would say, well, what do you mean that they underperform and underdeliver? I don't really get that, right? And then you as the writer, you have to go into more specifics, right? So what you mean by that. So conceptualize what it means to underperform, okay? So quantifiably, employees in such environments deliver 80% less profit results in the same 8-hour period than their counterparts who inhabit office spaces painted with vivid blue and yellow colors. Okay, so you have that dialogue, right? Have that dialogue, Hassan. That's one of the biggest keys, is that dialogue between yourself as the writer and yourself as the reader. Okay, so continue to push your own thoughts for more details, and the more you practice that, the better you'll get at it. Okay. All right, let's take one or two more. Let's see who's coming after. Let's see if I'm going to try to choose someone who hasn't, we haven't seen yet. Okay, so Okay, so Michael Fan is asking, in this sentence, today's mixing machines can create dough within 10 minutes, as to where the same process took an hour of kneading by hand before the mid-1900s. You use as to where, but you use as where in the audio class. Yeah, so I guess, Michael, you're asking me about the extra preposition to, okay? Yeah, it's both are okay, so as to where or as where. As where is simpler, Michael, so it's a little bit more elegant. The to is not necessary. It's not wrong, but it's not necessary. It adds a bit more emphasis, the to, but unnecessary, and usually it's better to go with the simpler way, okay? Yeah, it's a very, very specific kind of dictation type difference there, Michael. So don't give it too much thought. Both are okay. All right. No, Sammy, you're definitely not allowed to take any paper or work with you into the exam itself. You can take it to the exam center, but you need to leave it in your car or somewhere outside of the exam room. Of course, you can't take anything, even your mobile phone, into the exam room, okay? Yeah, so Beckjan's asking, how do we answer in part two speaking? How do we feel about it? Okay. Any opinion, Beckjan, that expresses your feeling? So, of course, feeling is your attitude. Okay. So, my attitude towards this, my sentiment. Yeah, I'll give you a couple ways. Okay. You could get this question. So, Beckjan's saying in part two speaking cue card, if one of the questions in part two is, how do you feel about it? Okay, then definitely express it. So you always want to directly attack the questions on the card. So you'd want to say something like, my sentiment towards this was or is, okay, my feelings in this regard are, I have a sense of, okay. So there's several different ways to paraphrase and to go about this, but definitely emphasize that in some direct way. Okay, that was a good question, all right? Nazir's asking, how general is easier than academic IELTS? Which sections, listening, reading, writing, speaking, of general IELTS is easier than academic? Nazir, not more easier, okay? ER, never mix that with more. So how is it easier? Nazir, the reading section and the writing sections are easier for the general, particularly task 1. It's not necessarily easier so much as it's different, but The reading is definitely easier because in the reading, you don't have three long passages. You have four short ones and one long one. So it's a bit easier to distinguish the information and to find the right answers. Like skimming and scanning for reading sections 1 and 2 in the general, Nazir, can actually be fairly effective because they're just short 1 page or 3/4 page passages with simpler information. Skimming and scanning is a much less useful strategy for the academic reading. Okay, so reading mostly, Nazir, general is easier, and task 1 in the writing, I would say, is easier as well. You don't need to analyze, you just have to think. For task 1, task 1, you're writing a letter, an email, something like that, Nazir. For the general, it's narrative writing, not expository. Narrative writing tends to be fairly easy. You can switch between the third, first, second person voice, so you don't have to be careful about using I, you so much. And also, you're basically telling a story, so you're using simpler English in task 1 of the general. Okay. All right. Okay, students, I'm going to stop there. I know there's lots and lots of questions. I hope I helped you clear up some of your concerns. All right. Rajamanikam, there is an HD video on this YouTube channel that shows you how to answer a map type question. There are different kinds of map type questions, so check that out, okay? All right, everyone, in 30 minutes, I will host another class for speaking part 3, continuing from yesterday's speaking part 2 class about the useful app. So hopefully I will see you there. And for all of our viewers, please do check us out at aehelp.com for academic IELTS and gieltshelp.com for general. If you're tired of getting 6 in your exam over and over again, it's time to change. A great place to start is with our websites and communicating with us using our speaking and our writing services. We can definitely help you to figure out what's going on, okay? That's it for now. Again, back in 30 minutes with some speaking part 3. Much love to all of you. See you shortly.